Martha Ellison stepped forward, gripping the edge of the plaintiff's table. Her cardigan was a little too worn. Her hands trembled slightly, but her posture remained steady. She wasn't a lawyer, never claimed to be. Just an old woman, refusing to let her father's home be stolen by a corporate machine that saw people as nothing more than numbers on a balance sheet. The courtroom was already against her before she even spoke. They had underestimated her, dismissed her, and treated her like a fool. But that would change soon enough. Judge Raymond Fulton peered over his glasses, the corners of his mouth twitching in something that wasn't quite a smirk, but wasn't far from it either. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his gavel lightly on the bench. "Miss Ellison, representing yourself?" The question dripped with amusement. Martha met his gaze. "Yes, Your Honor." A chuckle echoed from the other side of the room. Victor Langley, the opposing attorney, adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate ease. A corporate bulldog with a track record of steamrolling small-time defendants, Langley was here to do what he did best: win. And Martha? She wasn't even a challenge. "This should be quick," Langley muttered under his breath to his assistant, who gave a knowing smile. Martha heard it. She was supposed to hear it. That was the point. But she kept her face still. She'd been counted out before. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated. That's why she was here. The judge let out a sigh, flipping through a file. "This is a property dispute, correct? A foreclosure challenge?" Martha nodded. "Yes, sir, my father's home." Fulton barely glanced at her. "And you believe you can argue this case against a seasoned attorney like Mr. Langley?" Martha didn't flinch. "I don't believe, Your Honor. I know." The courtroom went quiet. A few muffled chuckles came from the corporate side of the room, but there was something else too. Something unspoken. The kind of silence that comes when someone unexpected refuses to back down. Judge Fulton shook his head. "Very well. Let's get on with it." But Martha wasn't just here to argue. She was here to win. And they had no idea what was coming. The judge's skepticism was only the beginning. The real challenge was about to come from the man sitting across the aisle, the one who thought Martha had already lost. Victor Langley adjusted his tie with a smug smile. This was his playground. The courtroom, the rules, the strategy. He had crushed dozens like Martha Ellison before. An old woman with no degree, no firm backing her, no experience. This wasn't a case. It was a warm-up. Judge Fulton exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Mr. Langley, you may proceed with your opening statement." Langley rose with practiced ease, buttoning his jacket as he stepped toward the jury. His voice was smooth, confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is simple." He gestured toward Martha without even looking at her. "We have a woman who refuses to accept reality. The property in question was rightfully acquired by my client through legal foreclosure. The law is clear. The facts are irrefutable. This is not about emotion. This is about contracts, deadlines, and obligations. My client followed the law. Miss Ellison did not." A well-placed pause, a slow turn, then a casual shrug. "I sympathize. Losing a home is painful, but pain does not override legal responsibility. The numbers don't lie." He nodded once toward the judge and then took his seat, hands folded as if the case was already over. Martha sat still, unmoved. She'd expected this. But as she rose from her seat, she caught the way Judge Fulton leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a man watching something he didn't believe would be worth his time. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," Martha cleared her throat, her voice steady. "Mr. Langley is right about one thing. The law is clear. The question is, does his client actually follow it?" A flicker of irritation crossed Langley's face. Martha continued. "I've spent the last 6 months studying every case, every statute, every loophole that banks and corporations use to strip homes away from families, and I found something." Judge Fulton raised an eyebrow. "Something?" Martha nodded. "Yes, and it changes everything." Langley let out a quiet laugh. "Oh, this should be good." Martha ignored him. Instead, she turned to the judge. "Before I begin, Your Honor, I'd like to submit an official request for discovery because I have reason to believe the plaintiff is hiding something." The courtroom shifted. Judge Fulton sat forward, his expression less amused now. "Hiding what, Miss Ellison?" Martha's gaze locked onto Langley. fraud. And just like that, the room wasn't laughing anymore. The word fraud lingered in the air like a slow-burning fuse. Langley's smirk faded, and for the first time, Judge Fulton gave Martha more than just a passing glance. Fraud? The judge's voice carried a note of skepticism, but there was something else beneath it: curiosity. Martha nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I believe the foreclosure on my father's home was based on forged documents, and I can prove it, if I'm allowed to request full discovery. Langley let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. Your Honor, this is absurd. A baseless accusation meant to stall the inevitable. The property was seized under standard foreclosure proceedings. Martha tilted her head. Standard? She took a step forward, her voice steady. Tell me, Mr. Langley, how standard is it for a bank to foreclose on a house when the original mortgage documents have two different signatures from the same person? The courtroom rustled. A few murmurs broke out in the gallery. Langley's jaw clenched. What are you talking about? Martha reached into her folder and pulled out 2 copies of the original mortgage agreement. She walked over to the bailiff and handed them up to the judge. These are 2 separate copies of the same document, Your Honor, one from the initial filing and one from a later modification. If you look at the signatures, you'll notice they don't match. Judge Fulton leaned in, scanning the papers. His forehead creased. Martha continued. Now, I'm no expert, but I know my father's signature, and that second one, that's not his. The judge flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from dismissive to focused. He looked up at Langley. Mr. Langley, do you have an explanation for this? Langley cleared his throat. Your Honor, this is an attempt to confuse the issue. Signatures can change over time. Martha didn't let up. Maybe. But that second signature is from a document filed only 3 months after the original, and if you compare them side by side, she pointed toward the papers in the judge's hand, you'll see that not only do they look completely different, but the second one was signed the day after my father was hospitalized for a stroke. A wave of reaction rippled through the courtroom. Even the jury leaned forward. Judge Fulton turned back to Langley, his tone firmer now. Mr. Langley, does your client have the original signed documents on file? Langley hesitated. It was quick, barely noticeable, but Martha saw it, and so did the judge. We would need time to retrieve them, Your Honor. Martha smiled. That's fine, I'll wait. The silence in the room shifted. It wasn't just intrigue anymore. It was doubt. But Martha wasn't just here to poke holes in their story. She was here to tear it apart, piece by piece. And this was only the beginning. Judge Fulton exhaled sharply, then adjusted his glasses. Mr. Langley, given the serious nature of these allegations, I am granting the request for full discovery. Your firm will provide all original documentation related to this case within the next 72 hours. Failure to do so will result in immediate legal consequences. Langley paled. Your Honor, I'm not finished. The judge's tone was razor-sharp. He turned to Martha. Miss Hayes, if this claim is substantiated, we're looking at more than just an unlawful foreclosure. We could be talking about fraud on a massive scale, perjury, criminal charges. Martha nodded, steel in her voice. I understand, Your Honor, and I intend to prove it. A slow ripple of whispers filled the courtroom. Then, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room creaked open. A man stepped inside, his cane tapping against the marble floor with deliberate, measured movements. The gallery gasped. Martha turned, her breath catching. Dad? Her father, frail but determined, walked toward her, his eyes locked on Langley. The color drained from the attorney's face. Judge Fulton raised an eyebrow. And who might you be, sir? He lifted his chin, voice unwavering. Joseph Hayes, Your Honor, the man whose signature was forged. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, a few audible curses. Langley stumbled back a step, his fingers twitching at the cuffs of his suit jacket. Judge Fulton banged his gavel. Order! Order in the court! The commotion quieted, but the tension thickened. Martha turned back to the judge, her voice calm but lethal. Your Honor, I think we just found our star witness. Judge Fulton studied Joseph Hayes for a long moment. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he leaned forward, folding his hands together. His expression was unreadable, but the weight in his tone was unmistakable. Mr. Langley, the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Do you wish to amend your statement?" Langley opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Very well." Judge Fulton straightened. "In light of this testimony and the gravity of the accusations, I am ordering an immediate evidentiary hearing. Mr. Hayes's sworn affidavit will be recorded today. And if his claims hold," the judge fixed Langley with an icy stare, "I will personally refer this case to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation." A stunned hush settled over the courtroom. Martha inhaled deeply, turning toward her father. He gave her a small, knowing nod, the same nod he used to give her before big spelling bees, before she took the bar exam. "You've got this." She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. The gavel slammed down once more, but this time it didn't just signal order. It signaled the beginning of the end for Langley and everyone who had forged her father's name. And Martha Hayes would make sure of it.